it's Mary Sheila, and thank you so much for tuning in to my channel on Occidental Nutrition. And I'm really excited to have my dear friend and colleague, Thais Harris, joining me today in my office at my house. We're going to be doing some cooking in the kitchen. We just went on a little hike, so we're having a little powwow today. And Thais is a colleague. She's also a board-certified holistic nutritionist. And she has a business with her husband called Nourishing Together. He is a psychotherapist, Nick Shawley.
Right.
And so, they help people to really connect the dots between the physical, the spiritual, and the emotional of really nurturing together in your household, in your partnership. So I thought today we would take maybe some of the 5 most easiest to implement important things that you can do to nourish together in your relationship, in your family, in your household, whoever your significant other or others are. How can you really bring that love into how you nourish each other, right? It's so important to keep ourselves healthy. So that's what we're going to be laying down for you today. I'm really excited. And just for a moment, just share a little bit about yourself and who you are, because you're actually, you have quite a story. You're a Brazilian babe. Tell us about yourself.
Thank you so much for having me here. And we've been blessed with such a beautiful day and going for a hike. It's already been very nurturing and nourishing. And so Nick and I started Nourish Together in 2012, actually, after, from the beginning of our relationship, really wanting to collaborate together, wanting to offer something together. We really saw in each other such partners, like really for, in terms of friendship, all aspects of love. And I'm really blessed to be so supported, and we support each other so well. And we really wanted to share a little bit of that. And I went to school for nutrition. He is a licensed MFT, which is a marriage and family therapist. And what I saw in my practice, I started working one-on-one with women, and especially women, not solely, but most of my clients were women, that would then start making separate meals for themselves because they had zero buy-in from the family. And often they wanted to start an endeavor on their own. And it became really unsustainable very quickly to make something for themselves, something separate for the husband, sometimes something separate for their kids.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Which is a big issue. And so Nick and I always had this conversation, how can, everybody needs to be invested for change to actually take hold, and it benefits the whole family. And at the same time, Nick is seeing clients where food has such a huge influence on how they're feeling, on their mood swings, depression, all mental disorders really have a direct relationship with how we are feeding ourselves. And we also saw that, the notion of feeding is really not only food is information and it's talking to our genes and with our whole being, but how we also feed ourselves as far as our thoughts, things that we keep telling ourselves that we're really sometimes swallowing our experience when it doesn't get digested, how it can really create issues. You can even connect certain things with large intestine issues, small intestine issues that are coming in from unprocessed psychological stuff that we're exposed to. And so we really decided that we wanted to collaborate, bringing nutrition and psychology, mindfulness together. And so this last year, we actually took a sabbatical and we traveled in Europe, and we got to present at a wonderful conference called the Science and Non-Duality Conference, SAND. And from there also got to teach in another 4 communities in 4 different countries total, and 5 talks about this notion of optimizing diet as an acronym for daily intake of everything, including food, very importantly food, but also even breath. We need our daily intake of breath, right? Deep breath, because we tend to run this shallow breathing.
Take a deep breath, everybody. It's true, though. It's so true. It's whenever you're reminded of breath, you're like, Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So that's so awesome. So you traveled around the world and you shared this idea of dietary intake of everything. And yeah, and so let's really just dive into some of those tactics. What I want to just say that's so when Thais and I were talking about, let's do a talk on this. Like, what are we going to talk about when we're together? And because there's so many things we could talk about.
True.
So one of the things I thought of was the fact that you have this wellness business with your husband, and you really bring that forward. And it reminded me of a story, which is kind of a funny story that I'm going to tell you right now about me and my husband. So, I have a background in Ayurveda, and as when I was studying Ayurveda, I was making a lot of dals and khichiris and loving them. But my husband wasn't loving them. He doesn't really like lentils that much, and he doesn't feel like he tolerates them that well. But, I was in school, I was working, I had a little one. I was a busy mama. And so making a khichdi or a dal was really easy for me. So sometimes I would just think, well, kind of like, too bad for you. I'm making this tonight because it's just really easy and it's what I'm going to do.
And it's good. You should like it.
Exactly, right? And it's got all these spices in it. So I was making it again, and he comes in and he could smell it right away. And he walks in, by the kitchen. He's like, "Oh, what are you making?" And he's like, "Screw me soup." And I was like, "Oh, that was kind of sharp." And then I felt really bad. Like, yeah, I am making it again because it's easy for me, but you don't like it. You don't want to have it. And, and it was creating this conflict. So, so I probably didn't make it for a little bit after that. And maybe a couple weeks later, I was making some garbanzo beans. And he walks in the house and he's like, "What are you making?" And he looks over in the stove. He's like, "Chi-chi beans?" And I said, "Chi-chi beans?" And he's like, "Yeah." It was almost like a little kid. And I said, "Did your mom used to make you chi-chi beans?" And he's like, "Yeah." And then I thought, oh my gosh, this is like his comfort food. Like, okay, I found the bean. I like chi-chi beans. My daughter liked them, and he loves them, and he's got this comfort level. Can I make that switch to, my lentils that he doesn't like and doesn't feel like he tolerates, to the chi-chi beans? So I did. And we have those, more regularly than we have the dal. I can't even remember the last time I made a dal recently, but, I still love to make them for like my lunch. My daughter likes them. So, that's how I've negotiated that. So, it's like finding those things that can work for everybody, that makes everybody happy, that doesn't alienate somebody. Or so you're not the busy mom making 3 meals. Like, that is so common. Like, raise your hand or throw a comment down if you're like, yeah, I make this many meals. And there's got to be an easier way, because, we don't have that doesn't feel good, even as maybe the family's like, "Wow, thanks, Mom." Or maybe they barely say thanks. But then at the same time, you're like, that doesn't feel that good to me, to have to do that.
Yeah. And the thing is that sometimes it's such a small tweak and a switch, like, being able to just replace what the beans were,
right,
or the pulse in that particular dish, and sometimes the adjustments are bigger. But I think one of the main things is that we don't always know how important it is to the other person.
Yeah.
And I think that brings us to our number one thing, which is really clear communication. And communication really involves a few different things. The first one being listening. And I think listening to our own bodies, which sometimes we don't do because we are so busy and we're running around, and sometimes there's so much input of all the other things that are in our daily intake, that we don't stop to just really listen to our body. Like, before a meal, how are we feeling? How hungry we are. After a meal, like, how am I feeling after I ate this? And having that own sort of understanding within, and then be able to extend that to the other person, and really be able to listen to them and what's happening. And I think even for Nick and I, like, we have different caloric needs. He's a very tall man, and he has a very fast metabolism. So I think sometimes even understanding, I can't make a little meal where it's like, this is all I need for my breakfast, and then,
like, totally.
Also give him that. Like, there's always a consideration of all three of us, we have a small child, and so like what we need is slightly different. And so, but that communication so that he can come forward, you know, and sometimes it's like, I'm even like, he's like, this is too much, you know, and being able to really understand like, oh, okay. Or something that they might like, but that might give them gas or phlegm, like in case of dairy. A couple that I worked with, like they were able to really keep each other accountable because they really understood each other's needs. And one person was really sensitive to dairy and got a lot of phlegm, and you know, especially in the winter. The other person was more sensitive to sugar and some mood swings, and so they were able to lovingly, like, not point out like, hey, look, you know, sugar's doing this to you, but like, oh, have you noticed? Exactly. Have you noticed like that you haven't like been uncomfortable lately, or you know, things like that, where I think, and having really that kind communication with them and with ourselves, so that if we do something that's maybe not ideal, we're not going to always be 100%, you know, on top of it and being perfect, but that we can really extend kindness to our partner and then to ourselves. Like,
and what that makes me think of a little bit, just to throw in a little, and then we'll go to the second one, is you know, good communication. It could even be where on the weekend you're like, okay, what meals do we want to plan for dinners together, and getting everybody on it. Or I have one handout that I do with my clients where it's like, come up with a list of the family favorite meals and everybody can add to it. So you sort of know that, you know, what everybody loves, and that way you can make that dinner, and then they might even feel really special about that, you know. So doing the planning really helps, especially when you're busy, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, and then, you know, really working together to like make the meals. And sometimes cooking is not the strength of one of the partners, you know, but I feel like there's such fun, which is number two. So it's really having fun, seeing cooking and sort of the kitchen work as a little bit more fun than a chore, because it really does, I think, changing the perspective can really help if you put on some good music, you know, and really make it kind of a dance in the kitchen. Now, some spaces also don't allow for that. So there are ways in which I think the fun part could be even giving each other challenges. So if you can't, you have a kitchen where it's like two people is too small, or, you know, not easy to do. One person can just pull out things from the fridge and, you know, invite the other to cook. Sometimes I love what you said about planning, because that's such a big part of it. One person preps, and then there's things like you have, like, you know, chopped up celery and carrots and different things in the fridge that one person can do, and then the other one can actually do the cooking and putting it together and doing the magic with spices. You know, I know some people are really, they need a recipe. Some people are more comfortable kind of creating on the go. And so understanding from you know, the couple, like, who is the recipe person, who is the creative person, and then having a balance between the two.
Yeah. And I want to just add one thing into having fun in the kitchen. And I think part of the funness comes when you have enough time, right? When you're not in this like full on frenzy, like, I gotta get something, and you know, and that's a big piece. And with nourishment, I mean, just to even reflect on another story that I have is, you know, when I first started, when I was studying nutrition, my daughter was in preschool, and I had to keep a track of my food intake for the week. And I would have her, she was only in preschool 2 days for like, you know, 3 or 4 hours. And in those 3 or 4 hours, like, I conquered the world. I did everything, you know, under the sun, right? And then right before I had to go pick her up, I would whip together something to eat, and I would drive to pick her up and eat while I was going. And I had to write that down. And I was like, oh, like, how sad. You know, that's not very nourishing and nice to myself. And, you know, I'm going to become a nutritionist. And so I then, you know, made longer time for myself to then make my meal, sit down, eat it, and then go get her, you know. And it was like, again, there's that time factor, whether it's cooking, whether it's eating, it's just like creating enough time. So even when you sit down to have a meal, there's time to eat the meal, and you can have some family conversation and some laughs and some fun, you know. I mean, it's not always, sometimes whatever can happen, but even if there, you can sort of create that space for it, right? So that that like sitting down to eat a meal, there's an element of fun,
Right. And it's almost like sacred, but not, hard. I mean, we still have evenings where we have to feed them and get into bed, and, and it can be a scramble. But the idea is that there is kind of a reserved time that is the family time. That is, and if it's just a couple, it's also like it's a couple time to connect.
Yeah.
And, somebody said, I don't know who originally said this, but that if you don't make time for your health now, you may need to make time for your sickness later. And sometimes I think about that, because we are in this like fast pace, it is that even 50 years ago, people used to make a lot more time for sitting down for meals. I did not grow up in a culture that eats in the car. And so and when I do it, it still feels a little like wrong. Sometimes we all need to, whatever, road trips or, they're fun times too, to do that. But it was just an interesting way that we grew up, that now it's much more accelerated. And people don't see eating as a process that needs its own time.
Yeah, exactly.
And it can be really fun. And it can bring us to then the next portion, the number 3, which is gratitude.
Oh, yeah.
And, when we were doing the daily intake of everything work, we really focused the way we talk about food and nourishment and really going into gut, heart, and brain. And so the nutrients for gut, heart, and brain, like what are those main nutrients? And really for gut is presence in this context.
Yeah.
And what that means, and that presence is really being able to really sit for a meal.
Yeah.
Be able to take a deep breath, put the body in a parasympathetic state so that we're not, in an accelerated, like stressful mode where no energy goes to digestion, for example.
Totally.
Which is, really unfortunate, creates a whole cascade of other events than if we're not digesting our food. And so that presence, being able to be with what is, with our food, with our partners, with, our reality as is, like just really being able to allow for digestion. And then the gratitude piece, which is really the big nourishment for the heart, because that's one of the quickest ways to actually get out of the sympathetic mode, which is that fight or flight. Is once we acknowledge like what is good, what is positive, we can really come out of that hormonal imbalance that comes from being stressed out.
Yeah.
So add on.
Well, it's just like kind of like bring back grace, I mean, really it's about having that gratitude. And, maybe none of our lives are perfect and we're always working on something, and, we can have that rumination, but if we just can find that gratitude, I mean, that is going to put us in that rest and digest mode. And that is absolutely what we want and need. Yeah.
And I know that, in Nick's work with couples specifically, when they're in therapy and there's a lot going on, as maybe crises, but maybe just trying to get to a better place together, how important gratitude becomes. Because when conflict arises, so if you think about that internally, when you have your own conflicts going on or negative thoughts, if you can take a breath and question like, is this true? And B, go, well, here's what I am grateful about myself. And here's what I love about myself. This is work I do with my clients. We don't take care of things we don't really love, or at least we don't take care very well, right? We might put it outside and let it rain on or whatever. But if it's something we really love, we're going to care for it. And so finding that in ourselves every day, it's a big tool for actually, achieving wellness and staying on track.
So I have one more thing. I just came up and, but I want to share this one gratitude practice that I do with my husband, which actually I'll be doing tomorrow because we're recording this today and tomorrow's our anniversary. And when we go out, and we usually, go out to dinner or even if we stay home, but what we usually do is we do a gratitude practice where we each share what we're grateful for about the other person. And I'll tell you that like lights a positive fire under me for months after hearing that, because I hear things that I don't even think of, you know, like, I'm so grateful and I so appreciate when you know, make my lunch, or when you take care of this thing, or do that every day. And all of a sudden, like, like the next few months when I'm doing that, I'm like, oh, he loves that I do this and appreciates it. And I do it with such more grace and ease, and it's amazing. So that simple act of gratitude, and I think, you know, again, talking about nourishing together, like being grateful for, wow, thank you so much for making this meal for me, or, you know, making my lunch, or filling up my water bottle when I asked you before I was rushing out the door, you know, whatever it is. And then even like creating a space for it, right? Like, let's just share gratitudes for each other. We might do that around Thanksgiving, or maybe, you know, like an anniversary, but wow, like that. And I mean, I just say it, and that's always my advice when somebody is newly married. I'm like, let me tell you what we do. And I kind of made it up on our first anniversary, and it's been like, all right, let's do this. Let me just like feel 2 feet taller, because you're going to tell me how proud I am.
Yeah, it's so amazing, right? It reinvigorates the relationship. Yeah, and it puts your own body at ease. It's like there's no better way to like put ourselves at ease. There's no contraindications. I mean, gratitude has no side effects.
No negative ones. Lots of positive ones.
Lots of positive ones. So yes, so gratitude, especially this notion of saying grace before meals. We really have that opportunity 3 times a day, for eating 3 meals a day, to really stop and practice some of the presence and the gratitude. And I'll get into acknowledgement, the next one, but also bring in the fun, bring in the communication, and that listening, right? Listening to our bodies. One of the teachers I really admire and look up to, Hail Sophia Schatz, when she works with her clients, she asks them, really think about, when does this become me? Yeah. Which was such a big way that I thought, oh yeah, I am communicating with my body. And like, everything I eat becomes my very cells. Yeah. So how do I want to build myself? And, but back to gratitude. Yeah. Just this notion that we can do it 3 times a day. And, you know, it's really sweet. I mean, my 5-year-old will sit, we'll hold hands, and it just takes a minute, you know, to just go around and say one thing you're grateful for, or 2 or 3. I mean, it can be. And sometimes it's really sweet that my son will look at me and say, I'm really grateful for you, Mommy, and this lovely meal that you made for us. And it just like, oh, my heart is wide open. And you know, I won't say we don't do that every meal. Like, some days we forget, or we're, you know, each in our own different workspaces, school, etc. But more often than not, when we're together, we do that. And it really strengthens, I think, our bond with each other. So then that brings us to the brain, right? That nourishment for the brain. And there's a couple there. Nothing as a nutrient, like no thing, having space to, you know, that in relationship, it looks like having space for each other separately, and, you know, having quiet time, having space to just be in nature and doing nothing. Sometimes not talking, doing walks where we're silent and we can still be together, but in our own space. For the body may look like having mini fasts right between meals, because we really need that time to digest. And so, especially at night, giving our bodies a 12-hour period where there's no intake, so the body can do what it needs, especially the liver. So nothing as a nutrient. And I think that, again, it's something that feels like it's missing in our current modern lifestyle. And sometimes it's hard for me to look like nothing, you know, and meditation and all that gives me a little bit of a focus. But I think even with not going into that, but just being able to watch the flowers grow, literally, you know.
And not feeling guilty about doing nothing, right? Not feeling guilty about, wow, I'm just going to relax and be, you know. Absolutely. I think that's really important. And, you know, I love that idea. And I love even, you know, if you think about today, we're all talking about intermittent fasting and the benefits of that. And that really is, you know, giving everything a rest physically, right? And then can we give everything a rest here, right?
Right.
And how can we do that? And how can we access that place of being? Because we are human beings, right?
Yeah, non-human doings.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes we need a fast for the thoughts.
Yes. Oh gosh. Yeah.
Because they run, some experts say 60,000 thoughts, some say 80,000, it depends, but they all say about 80% of them are the same. Yeah. And so we keep running this programming all the time, and I think it takes being nothing to even be able to recognize that.
So especially if you're an entrepreneur, we're talking to you on this one.
Yeah.
And we know, because we're talking to each other. And then looking in the mirror. Yes. All right, what's the last one?
Okay, so let's review here. So acknowledgement for the last one, but I just want to review that communication, and especially the listening part of the communication. Fun is a huge, because it gives us that joy to really do it. And whether it's, put some music that really connects you with your partner, or maybe your favorites, or stuff you played at your wedding, if there was such a thing, or something that, is connecting and fun. Involve the kids into the cooking, which can be really a blast. If you just think, okay, there's
as long as they're not teenagers,
more to clean up. But
you with your 5-year-old
working with series, but I have to say, like, you have both with the series community project where teens are the cooks, and I love doing that.
Yeah.
And then we talked about gratitude.
Yes.
And nothing. And acknowledgement. And this is where we bring in, even though we talked a little bit about being with reality, right? That presence. I think acknowledgement is more about not only the things like, I'm really grateful for all the little things you do, right? I really appreciate those. But really acknowledging like what is going on for you as a family. So sometimes there are family things that are informing how we're behaving, or there's financial stress, or there's whatever it is, like being able to acknowledge like, wow, in that moment, you spoke really out loud with me, and I felt, hurt. And I also can acknowledge that right now, like that person just cut you off in traffic, and you were already digesting information about, somebody who's ill, or whatever it is, like but being able to really, as part of the communication, acknowledge that out loud, because it really takes out that personal factor that sometimes people hold on to stuff. And I think likewise acknowledging for the food, like what are the nutrients that I'm bringing in, acknowledging that we're not alone, that there's this huge life, like network of life that lives within us. And I just heard this, that 80% of the metabolites in our blood are actually from our microbiome. Microbiome.
Like we have our little microbiome in each of them in our houses, right? We've got ours, and then we've got our like little family microbiome going on and where you live.
And they're living, they're eating, and and we're dealing with what makes them happy, what doesn't make them happy. And so acknowledging that we're not alone. So both internally, and how to feed that community that really supports us. And then how to feed into the community that supports us as, say, a couple or family, the people that, the friends and the family that are part of our support group.
And, I think like acknowledgement reminds me of like reflection, and sometimes reflecting back. Like, I just think of sometimes if, maybe, in my own family, if somebody's not feeling well, or if I'm noticing they're waking up congested every day. And then, I mean, for me, I know because I'm a nutritionist, like, sure have been eating a lot of nuts lately, or something, but, acknowledging, wow, I really noticed that you seem really congested. I wonder if there's anything we could do, or any shift that we need to make, or, or acknowledging that somebody's maybe working really hard and under stress, and maybe finding out if there's a way that you can support that person, or maybe there's an intuitive way you can support that person more, or, so I think that's a really great, way to just think of that, acknowledging the people in your little family or tribe or friend, even if it's a friends group, even if you live alone, and, you still want to kind of have that that connection to other people around your nourishment, because you're going to have it with your friends if there's not somebody else in your home. So,
right. Yeah. And I think, that brings back into like those easy tweaks once you can communicate and really understand like what somebody's needs are in a particular moment, what yours are. And sometimes it might even be that if it's a touchy thing where it's like you don't want to tell your partner again that maybe dairy's not working or that, that you can see, then maybe it's like, oh, would you like a digestive enzyme as the beginning of meal, right? Like there are little things that it's like, what are the ways that we can offer support without necessarily changing, what they're doing, even in the nutrition side of it.
Right. And one thing I find a lot with clients is that, the food that's a trigger for somebody, like the other partner is still buying it, or they're even still buying it for their family because they love it. But, I know, when I make my daughter gluten-free scones, she doesn't even really like them as much as I do. So I know when I make them, it's because I want them, even though I have this whole story that I'm making them for her. And it's even just acknowledging in yourself, and then also allowing your family to acknowledge, like, gosh, it's just too hard for me to have the chips in the house. Like, it's just I can't handle the ice cream in the freezer. I know that come, 10 o'clock at night, I'm going to have some. So is there, like, what's our workaround for this? Like, can we just talk about it? And, sometimes families will be like, oh, gosh, yeah, let's just not have it in the house for a while. Right. It's not a problem for anybody else. And if they really want it, they can maybe go get like an ice cream cone once in a while.
When they're out on their own.
Yeah, exactly. And then all of a sudden you put this into words, and instead it was really secretive. And just to share one other thing, and then, for years, I used to always do like a cleanse in January. I was always like, yeah, I'm going to do this cleanse. But it was all in my head, and it was all just me doing this. And I didn't really tell anybody. I didn't really always tell my husband. And, I didn't tell my daughter because it felt like too kind of maybe diety. And I really didn't want her to think, mom's dieting again. And have any of that relationship, that I've had in my past. So I would always do this, this thing, and I wouldn't tell anybody. And after maybe, whether it was like 3 days or a week and a half or whatever, I'd just kind of throw in the towel and just be like, meh. And most people have relationships to eating plans like that. Oh, I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to do this thing. And then all of a sudden, boom, you go back to your old ways. So finally one year I was like, hey, my husband, will you do this with me? And this is what I'm going to do. And he was like, yeah, sure, I'll do that with you. And he got really into it. And, even if he didn't get into it, I think if I could have said, hey, I'm going to do this, can you support me? But he said, yeah, I'll do this. And he got really into it, and he cooked a lot of the meals and like perfected them. He's a good cook. I'm a lucky girl. Married an Italian. So, it's just really about like, just good communication, acknowledging where I was at. And it was finally the first time I did it and I was successful. And I mean, he was like better at it than me. I was like, damn, you're good at this. Like, holding to the structure. And now it's an every year thing. Every year we are like, all right, let's just do this. And it's easy, and it's so good to have the support. So I think it's really, and I know not everybody has that. I know sometimes there's a lot of sabotage that can happen where and I know it, I've seen it. I've, had a lot of clients have had it. So my heart goes out to you. But, it could be also just approaching it in a different way, and really being able to speak your truth and, and however you do it. And sometimes it's even getting outside support, but I know that that's real, but I also know that, who knows, just always be open to that ability of like, the more I'm coming from my heart and, my wanting to nourish myself and be healthy, and my wanting to have, to really help my family and my partner and my friends or whatever it is to be healthy, the more I'm on that path, the further I'm going to get, the more ground I'm going to get.
Yeah, which is why I think this idea of acknowledging needs, it's so important, because number one, you have to know your own, right, and listen to your own, but be able to speak to that which is like, if somebody doesn't have that kind of fight with the ice cream in the fridge in their head going on, which is like it's them against the ice cream or whatever, like if somebody doesn't have that, like they wouldn't even imagine that the other person is dealing with it, you know. And so until that is said, it's like, and sometimes it's so easy. It's like, oh, I had no idea, right? I will just not bring that into the house.
Yeah.
And it can be really helpful, even if you don't, say, if your partner doesn't sign up to do a cleanse with you, but if they can understand, like, oh, this is what they want to do, I'm really going to support them in doing this.
Yeah.
But just not, I'll go eat lunch out.
Yeah,
and do whatever I'm going to do. But in the house, I'm going to make the space for this healing to happen, you know, for this goal to be achieved by my partner for a week, you know. And sometimes knowing, well, it's a limited time. I've also seen where people get really, they see the transformation in their partner, and then they're like, oh, okay, maybe I'll do that too. And then, you know, they sign up together. And so we do have it, Nourish Together. And the website is nourishtogether.com. There's packages for individuals that just want to do the work by themselves, and then we just talk a little bit about family dynamics to understand that. But there's also packages where people can come in as a couple, which is really fun. And I feel like where meaningful change, sustainable change really happens.
Yeah, and I'll post some links underneath here so you can, you know, connect with Thais and get on her mailing list. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for tuning in and sticking to the end. I would love for you to post any comments if there's any ahas you had, or any tips that you have that have worked well for you and your partner and your family, because, you know, we can all learn more and be inspired, and those ahas can really turn into action. So I invite you to share with us. So thank you so much and have a really great day.
Please do. Thank you.